For the first time, Madison's composure cracked. Her jaw tightened, and she stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You're not taking my kids away from me, Kyle. I won't let you. Hey. How was your day? I have a super interesting story to share with you today. If this is your first time to Reddit cheating stories, please like and subscribe. You know what? It's a great encouragement for us. Now, let's get started." The moment I pushed open the front door and saw the kitchen lights glowing, unease coiled in my gut. Madison never left the lights on. She was meticulous, always flipping switches and muttering about the electric bill. Tonight, though, the light's steady hum in the empty kitchen felt intentional, like a signal left behind. "Madison?" I called out, my voice bouncing unnaturally in the stillness. Too loud, too hopeful. No answer. The kids were upstairs, fast asleep. I'd tucked them in not long ago. Ethan with his bed buried under dinosaur books, and Lily curled around her stuffed fox. I'd kissed them goodnight, fully expecting to come back downstairs to Madison. She'd usually be curled on the couch, engrossed in some crime show she swore was better than it seemed. But tonight, the couch was empty. Her phone sat on the counter, plugged in. That was my first real warning. Madison never left her phone behind, not even to step out to the mailbox. It was practically an extension of her. I picked it up, reasoning she might have gone for a quick walk and forgotten it. A single notification glowed on the screen. "Can't wait to see you again. Same time tomorrow." My stomach nodded. The message was from someone named Kaylee. Madison didn't have a friend named Kaylee. The messaging app was locked, but the tone of that text lingered, sticky and suggestive. My thoughts spiraled. Who was this? Why did it feel intimate? I tried shaking it off. Madison had been distant lately, sure, but life was heavy, kids, work, routines. Drift was normal, wasn't it? But this felt different, and the unease sat heavy in my chest. The crunch of tires on gravel jolted me out of my thoughts. A moment later, Madison stepped inside, pulling her jacket tight against the cold. Her eyes flicked to me, standing frozen in the kitchen, but her expression didn't show surprise. Instead, there was something else: caution, a quiet wariness. "You're still up?" she asked casually, her tone a shade too light. "Where were you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Out," she replied, shrugging out of her jacket. "Needed some air. At 10 p.m.? Her tone sharpened. "Yeah, is that a problem?" I held up her phone. "Kaylee texted you." Her face drained of color, her composure cracking for just a moment before she reached for the phone. I pulled it back, my grip tightening. "Who's Kaylee?" I demanded. "It's nothing," she said quickly, her voice pitched just a little too high. "A friend from work? A friend from work who can't wait to see you again? Same time tomorrow? That's just a normal work friendship now." Her eyes narrowed, anger rising to meet mine. "You're overreacting." "Am I?" Without another word, she snatched the phone from my hand, her movements jerky, almost frantic. "You're being paranoid," she said, her voice cold, turning away from me. Something in me snapped. "Paranoid? Then show me the text, Madison." She whirled around, fury written across her face. But there was something else there, too, something raw. Fear, maybe. "Jesus, Kyle. Maybe if you weren't so suffocating, I wouldn't need to step out just to breathe." Her words hit like a slap. "Suffocating?" I barked. "I'm the one holding this house together while you're off doing God knows what." Before I could say more, she stormed past me, heading for the stairs. "Where are you going?" I shouted after her. "To bed," she snapped, not even glancing back. "You should try it sometime." And just like that, the conversation was over, unfinished, unresolved, and leaving a crack in something I wasn't sure we could repair. The slam of the bedroom door reverberated through the house, leaving a hollow echo in its wake. I stood frozen at the base of the stairs, staring at the empty landing above. My pulse thundered in my ears, a deafening rhythm that drowned out coherent thought. My hands trembled as anger and confusion collided in a chaotic swirl. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table instead, Madison's phone still in my hand, its black screen a blank, unyielding wall. It seemed to taunt me, its silence more damning than any word she could have spoken. The house was unnervingly cold, as if the chill outside had seeped through every wall, and crevice. Something between us had cracked, something irreparable, or at least impossible to ignore. By the time morning arrived, I woke on the couch, my neck stiff and my chest heavy. I hadn't intended to fall asleep, but exhaustion claimed me sometime after 3 a.m. The house was quiet, too quiet. Normally, Saturdays began with a symphony of Ethan and Lily's chatter, the hum of cartoons in the background, and the coffee machine bubbling in the kitchen. But today, nothing. Madison was already gone. Her phone, which I had deliberately left on the kitchen counter in plain sight, had disappeared as well. No note, no text, just absence. I glanced at my watch. 9:42 a.m. It wasn't unusual for her to step out early on a Saturday, running errands or getting groceries, but something about this felt off. I poured myself a cup of coffee, staring out the kitchen window, half expecting her car to pull back into the driveway at any moment. Instead, my gaze fell on the mailbox, where a cluster of letters poked out, fluttering slightly in the breeze. I retrieved the stack and rifled through it on my way back inside. Bills, junk mail, and then something odd, a postcard. It wasn't addressed to Madison or me by name, only our shared address. The handwriting was rushed and uneven, almost illegible. Missed you yesterday. Thursday can't come soon enough. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the card, the words searing into my mind like a brand. At the bottom, the signature read simply J. My thoughts snapped back to the text from Kaylee and the cryptic message it carried. The connection wasn't clear yet, but it loomed like a shadow on the edges of my understanding. I tossed the postcard onto the table, my hands trembling. Ethan and Lily padded into the kitchen, their eyes puffy with sleep. Ethan tugged at my sleeve. "Where's Mom?" he asked, his voice tentative. "She had to leave early," I said, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack. "How about pancakes?" The kids brightened at the suggestion, and I forced myself into a semblance of normalcy for their sake. But inside, my thoughts churned, tangled and relentless. By noon, I dropped them off at my sister's house, muttering something vague about needing to run errands. She gave me a quizzical look, but didn't pry. Back at home, the silence was suffocating. I sat at Madison's laptop, the weight of guilt pressing heavy on my shoulders. Snooping wasn't something I ever thought I'd do. It felt wrong, invasive. But after last night, my gut told me I had to know. The answers came quickly, almost too easily. Her email was open in a browser tab. A folder labeled innocuously as receipts caught my eye. At first, the content seemed mundane. Confirmation emails for hotel stays, restaurant reservations, ride shares. But the date stopped me cold. Tuesday, January 4th. Hotel booking confirmed for one guest. Friday, February 10th. Ride to Roosevelt Grill, 8:15 p.m. Thursday, March 2nd. Hotel booking confirmed for 2 guests. Each click deepened the hollow ache in my chest. The final blow came in the special instructions on one of the hotel reservations. "Room with a view, please. Madison." I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. These weren't trips she'd mentioned, dinners she'd shared with me, plans that included our life together. They were hers alone, secret, deliberate. My hands curled in a fist as I slammed the laptop shut. The anger in me boiled, but beneath it was something worse. Doubt, hurt. I sat in the stillness, trying to make sense of what I'd found, trying and failing to piece together who Madison had become, or whether I'd ever really known her at all. Betrayal? Rage? Confusion? It was like standing in the calm center of a storm, knowing the winds were about to tear everything apart. And then, as if on cue, the front door creaked open. Madison walked in, a grocery bag in one hand, her phone in the other, her thumbs flying across the screen like nothing had happened. "Hey," she said casually, not even sparing me a glance. I rose slowly from my seat, my heart hammering in my chest. "Where were you this morning?" She paused, just for a fraction of a second, before plastering on a smile, as if she hadn't quite caught my meaning. "What do you mean?" "I told you, I went out for groceries." "Really?" My voice was steady, but the undercurrent of anger was unmistakable. Because there's a postcard on the table and an inbox full of hotel receipts that paint a very different picture. Her face went pale, the blood draining so quickly I thought she might drop the bag. But then, as if on autopilot, she laughed, a sharp, forced sound that twisted the air between us. "Oh my God, Kyle," she said, rolling her eyes with practiced disdain. "Are you seriously going through my emails now? That's a new low. Even for you? Don't you dare turn this on me." My voice cracked like a whip. "What the hell is going on, Madison? Who's Jay? And what's with the hotel bookings?" For a split second, panic flashed in her eyes, raw and unguarded. But just as quickly, she buried it, brushing past me to set the bag on the counter. "You're being ridiculous," she said, her tone clipped. "Jay is a colleague. The hotels were for work trips. You're blowing this way, out of proportion. Work trips?" My voice was rising now, shaking with fury. "Then why didn't you tell me about them? Why keep them a secret?" "Because I knew you'd react like this," she snapped, her voice rising to meet mine. "You're paranoid, Kyle. You always have been. I can't breathe without you questioning me." Her words landed like a slap, stinging and deliberate. "Paranoid?" I spat, the anger boiling over. "I've been holding this family together, Madison, busting my ass for us. Meanwhile, you're sneaking around with whoever the hell Jay is." Her jaw clenched, her expression tightening like she was holding something back. For a second, I thought she might finally tell me the truth. But then she shook her head, her eyes hardening. "I don't owe you an explanation," she said, her voice cold as steel. "You've already decided what you want to believe." And just like that, she turned and left the room, disappearing into the bedroom without another word. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway, the silence pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't lift. My thoughts raced, trying to assemble the fragments into something that made sense. But every piece only seemed to deepen the shadows. I couldn't let her walk away from this. Not again. Before I knew it, I was following her, my steps quick and deliberate. The bedroom door was ajar, and when I stepped inside, I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring down at the floor. For a moment, her expression looked almost guilty, but when her eyes met mine, they were cold and guarded, like a fortress with the gates slammed shut. "What now, Kyle?" she asked, her voice heavy with irritation. "Haven't you done enough for one day?" "Enough?" The word tore from my throat, raw and jagged. "You think I'm just going to drop this?" "Madison, I found receipts for hotel rooms you never mentioned. A postcard from someone who misses you. And that text, same time tomorrow? You're not even trying to hide it anymore." Her face didn't flinch. If anything, she looked annoyed, as if I were an inconvenience she couldn't quite brush off. "You're making something out of nothing," she said, folding her arms across her chest. "Stop lying," I shouted, the words exploding out of me. Finally, her calm facade cracked. She shot up from the bed, her eyes blazing with fury. "You want the truth, Kyle? Fine." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with raw, unchecked anger. "The truth is, I'm sick of this. Sick of you hovering, playing detective. Sick of this house. Sick of you." Her words hit me like a freight train, each one heavier than the last. "Sick of the house?" I echoed, my voice hollow. "This is our home. Our family's home." She didn't respond. She didn't have to. The silence between us was louder than anything she could have said. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head as though I were the punchline to some cruel joke. "You want to know what's wrong?" she snapped. "Look in the mirror. You're so busy being Mr. Perfect dad and husband. You don't even see how suffocating you are. Every conversation is about the kids, or the bills, or what's for dinner. God forbid I want something for myself." Her words hit like a sledgehammer, leaving me momentarily speechless. The room seemed to tilt, her accusations throwing everything off balance. This wasn't just about the postcard or the texts or the hotels. This was about her, about how she saw me. She wasn't just distant, she was resentful. But I wasn't going to let her deflect, not now. "Don't you dare blame this on me," I said, my voice low but shaking with fury. "You've been lying. To me, to Ethan, to Lily for God knows how long. What the hell are you doing in those hotels, Madison? What are you hiding?" She didn't answer, her silence louder than any confession. Who's Jay's? I pressed, taking a step closer. Is he the reason you're sneaking around? Is he the one you've been? Stop it, she screamed, cutting me off. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her whole body taut like a bowstring about to snap. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me, I roared, my voice reverberating off the walls. Tell me what's going on? Because right now, it looks like you're cheating on me, Madison. And if I'm wrong, you'd better start explaining why I'm finding all this crap. Her lips trembled, but it wasn't guilt that glinted in her eyes. It was anger. You want to know who Jay is? She spat, her voice laced with venom. Fine. He's someone who doesn't treat me like a maid or a nanny. Someone who actually listens to me. Someone who... She trailed off, the words hanging in the air like smoke. Her face flushed red as though she'd realized she'd gone too far, but it was too late. The damage was done. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I could barely breathe. You're seeing someone else? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence spoke volumes, the truth cutting through me like a blade. I felt the ground give way beneath me. All the late nights spent working so I could free up weekends for her and the kids. All the date nights I'd planned, convinced we just needed to reconnect. It was all a lie. What about Ethan and Lily? I asked, my voice breaking. Do they even cross your mind while you're off with him? Do you ever think about what this would do to them? Don't you dare bring the kids into this, she hissed, her voice sharp and cold. This has everything to do with them. I snapped, the words boiling up from somewhere deep and raw. Are you insane? Everything you do affects them. They deserve better than this. They deserve better than you. Her face contorted with rage, her hands twitching like she wanted to slap me, but couldn't quite bring herself to do it. Instead, she grabbed her bag from the nightstand and stormed toward the door. I'm done with this conversation, she said over her shoulder, her tone flat and final. I need space. Don't wait up. The front door slammed shut with a thunderous crash that echoed through the house. I stood there, rooted to the spot, staring at the empty doorway. My head pounded, my chest ached, and my thoughts spun wildly out of control. But beneath the chaos, one thought began to crystallize. This wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was about protecting Ethan and Lily from the fallout of her selfishness. And for the first time, I realized I couldn't just sit here, waiting for her to come back on her own terms. The house felt cavernous and hollow in her absence. Not a relief, but a gaping void that threatened to swallow me whole. As the minutes dragged into hours, my fury began to cool, hardening into something sharper, more resolute. This was no longer about saving a marriage. It was about saving what was left of my family. And I wasn't going to let her take that from me. If Madison thought she could walk all over me and leave me in the dark, she was sorely mistaken. I stormed downstairs, grabbed my phone, and dialed my sister's number. Hey, Kyle, she answered, her voice as warm and steady as ever. What's up? Are the kids okay? They're fine, I said briskly, cutting straight to the point. They're playing with Max. Everything good with you? She hesitated, and I knew she could hear the tension in my voice. Yeah, just a lot going on. Listen, can they stay with you overnight? I've got some things I need to sort out. There was a pause, but only a brief one. Of course, she said, concern lacing her tone. Take whatever time you need. With Ethan and Lily safe for the night, I turned my attention back to the house. This place wasn't just my home anymore. It was my battlefield. Madison had left me no choice but to act, and I wasn't about to waste another second wallowing in helplessness. I started by gathering the evidence. The postcard sat on the table, its cryptic words still burning in my mind. I took screenshots of the texts I'd seen on her phone and printed copies of the hotel receipts I'd found in her email. My hands moved steadily through the motions, but my chest felt like it was caving in. Every detail I uncovered only confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't some misunderstanding or a momentary lapse. She was cheating, plain and simple. Next, I went to our bedroom. Her side of the closet was chaos. Half-empty hangers swayed limply, and clothes were shoved into corners with no rhyme or reason. It struck me how much of her life had already started slipping away from ours, piece by piece. I found what I was looking for tucked into one of her smaller bags, a notebook. Inside were pages of handwritten notes, the scrawled, uneven script immediately recognizable as hers. Meeting Jay at 7. Bring wine. Thursday, room 214, late check-in. Can't wait to see you. The bile rose in my throat, but I forced it down and kept flipping through. Then I found something worse. A list. Pros and cons of leaving. The pros section was filled with shallow, cutting phrases like freedom, no more nagging, and space to breathe. Under cons, there were only 2 words. Ethan and Lily. I gripped the notebook so tightly my knuckles went white. She'd reduced our entire life, our family, to a damn list of advantages and disadvantages. Like this was some kind of corporate decision, not the wreckage of everything we'd built together. That's when I knew. This wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a war. I wasn't going to stand on the sidelines while she tore everything apart. The rest of the day passed in a haze of determination. I packed bags for Ethan and Lily, clothes, toys, anything they might need for a few days. Then I moved through the house, collecting anything that was mine or belonged to the kids. Photographs, mementos, pieces of our life that actually mattered. By evening, the house felt eerily empty without their presence. It was wrong. It felt like I was hollowing out something that should have been sacred. But it was necessary. I wasn't running. I was protecting my children. Madison didn't come home that night. I hadn't expected her to. Wherever she was, whoever she was with, she didn't have the guts to face me again. When the morning light filtered through the windows, I left a note on the counter. You ignored me for an entire day. When you came back, the kids and I were gone. Revenge has started. It wasn't about pettiness. It was a warning. Before I stepped out the door, I changed the locks. If Madison wanted back in, she'd have to face me first. As I shut the door behind me, something shifted inside. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was the one in control. The kids were playing in my sister's backyard when I arrived, their laughter drifting through the open window like a bomb against the storm raging in my chest. For a moment, it felt like a slice of normalcy in the chaos. Madison hadn't called. She hadn't texted. Not yet. But I knew her. The silence wouldn't last. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed. Her name lit up the screen, but I let it ring, my hands tightening around my coffee mug. A voicemail popped up moments later. I stared at it, the temptation to listen tugging at me. I wasn't ready to hear her excuses, to listen to whatever story she'd spun to make this my fault. But curiosity was a relentless thing, and it was only a matter of time before it won. After a steadying breath, I pressed play on the voicemail. Kyle. Her voice came through sharp, clipped, almost frantic. What the hell is this? Where are you? Where are the kids? Call me back. Now. Short. Direct. Furious. I leaned back in the chair, letting her words sink in. She wasn't scared. She wasn't sorry. She was livid that I dared to take control. Good. Let her feel the panic, the helplessness. She deserved it. The phone rang again, her name lighting up the screen. And then again, by the 5th call, I answered. What do you want, Madison? I asked, my tone cold and measured. Where are the kids? She demanded, forgoing any pretense of civility. They're safe, I said simply. That's not an answer, she snapped. You can't just take them and disappear, Kyle. This is insane. You ignored me for an entire day. I shot back, my voice tightening with the weight of everything unsaid. When you came home, it was like we didn't exist to you. Did you think I'd just sit there and keep pretending everything was fine? There was a moment of silence, heavy and loaded. Then her tone shifted, softening just enough to sound almost reasonable. This isn't about the kids, she said carefully. This is about us. Whatever's going on, we need to talk about it. You can't just run away every time things get hard. I laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and humorless. You think I'm the one running away? You've been lying to me, sneaking around, meeting. I cut myself off, my jaw clenching tight. You want to talk? I said, my voice cold. Fine. Who's Jay? The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight with indignation. You've been going through my things, she said, a clear deflection. Answer me, I demanded. She sighed, the dramatic kind of exhale that used to defuse arguments when we were younger. But not this time. Jay is just a friend, she said, her tone careful, too measured. Someone I talk to when things get overwhelming. That's it, overwhelming. I repeated, the words sour in my mouth. And what about the hotel rooms? The postcard? The texts? Were those just for talking to? Her voice turned icy. You're blowing this way out of proportion, Kyle. Nothing happened. I didn't cheat on you. For a moment, I almost believed her. Almost. But the cracks in her story were too wide to ignore. You're lying, I said, my voice trembling with suppressed anger. I saw the receipts, Madison. I saw the notebook. You've been planning this, whatever this is, for months. Don't do this, she hissed. Don't make me the villain here. You did that yourself, I snapped. The line went quiet, the silence punctuated by her uneven breathing. I could picture her, pacing, calculating her next move. What do you want me to say? She asked finally, her voice low, almost resigned. The truth, I said, the single word cutting through the tension. She didn't respond. I'm filing for divorce, I said, the decision spilling out before I could second-guess it. And until this is sorted, the kids are staying with me. Are you serious? She shouted, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. You're gonna tear this family apart over your stupid insecurities? Don't you dare turn this on me, I said, my voice firm and unyielding. You made your choices, Madison. Now you have to live with them. Before she could respond, I hung up. For a moment, the silence in the house was deafening, as though the world itself had paused to take a breath. But as I turned to look out the window at Ethan and Lily playing in the backyard, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. This wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was about protecting what mattered most. It was about rebuilding a life that no longer depended on her lies. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe. But the peace didn't last long. By late afternoon, Madison escalated. The buzzing of my phone was unrelenting. A relentless barrage of calls and texts, shifting between desperate pleas and biting accusations. I ignored them all, steeling myself for whatever storm was brewing. I didn't expect her to show up. I was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes from lunch, when I heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. My sister's house was supposed to be a refuge, a calm, stable sanctuary for the kids and me. Seeing Madison's car pull into the driveway shattered that illusion. The car door slammed shut with enough force to make the windows rattle. I stepped out onto the porch just as she stormed toward the house, her face dark with fury. What the hell do you think you're doing, Kyle? She barked, her voice cutting through the stillness of the afternoon. Keeping my kids safe, I replied evenly, planting myself firmly in the doorway. Safe? She echoed, her voice thick with incredulity. She threw her arms up in frustration. For me? Are you out of your mind? I'm their mother, and you've been lying to them. I shot back, my tone sharp. To all of us, you don't get to play the victim now. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, it looked like she might push past me. But instead, she folded her arms across her chest, fixing me with a glare sharp enough to cut steel. You're overreacting, she said, her tone measured but laced with simmering anger. Whatever you think you know, you're wrong. Then prove it, I said, stepping closer. Explain the hotels, the texts, the postcard. Look me in the eye and tell me there's nothing going on. Her gaze flickered away, just for a split second, but it was enough. I'd seen that tell too many times before. Are you seriously punishing me for needing space? She countered, her voice rising. You're acting like some controlling. Don't, I interrupted, my tone as cold as ice. Don't try to twist this into something it's not. This isn't about space. It's about betrayal. You've been lying. To me, to the kids, for months. The words lingered between us, heavy and suffocating. Her anger faltered then, her shoulders sagging slightly. For a moment, I thought she might finally admit it, but the guarded look in her eyes told me otherwise. What do you want from me, Kyle? She asked, her voice quieter now, almost resigned. An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. Okay? I'm sorry I didn't tell you about the hotels. I'm sorry I needed a break from... She waved her hand vaguely toward the house. Toward our life. From all of this, the dismissal in her tone stung more than I cared to admit. You don't get it, do you? I said, my voice thick with disbelief. This isn't about needing a break. It's about trust. You didn't just hide things. You erased me. From your plans. From your life. And now you want to waltz back in here like nothing's happened? She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Ethan's voice rang out from behind me. Mom! I turned to see him standing in the doorway, Lily peeking out from behind him, her wide eyes filled with questions she was too young to voice. Madison's expression shifted instantly. Her anger dissolved, replaced with a calculated softness. Ethan, sweetheart, she said, her voice bright and sugary. She stepped forward, her arms outstretched. I was just talking to Daddy. Everything's fine. I blocked her path, my heart pounding in my chest. You don't get to do that, I hissed, keeping my voice low enough that the kids couldn't hear. Do what? She snapped, her words dripping with venom. Pretend, I said, the anger making my voice tremble. Pretend like everything's fine when you've been tearing this family apart behind the scenes. Her eyes flashed with defiance, but she didn't argue. Instead, she crouched down to Ethan's level, forcing a bright smile that didn't touch her eyes. Why don't you and Lily go back inside, okay? She said gently. Mommy and Daddy need to talk. Ethan hesitated, his gaze darting between us, but Lily grabbed his hand and tugged him back into the house. The screen door slammed shut behind them. As soon as they were out of earshot, Madison stood and crossed her arms, her expression hardening. This isn't over, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You can't keep them from me. They're my kids too. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, but I didn't flinch. They're not pawns in whatever game you think you're playing, I said firmly. And until you can stop lying, to them and to me, you don't get to call the shots. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. For once, it seemed like there was nothing left for her to say. They're staying with me, I said, my voice firm and unyielding. Until you figure out what you want. Who you want, you don't get to disrupt their lives anymore. Madison laughed, a bitter sound that cut like glass. You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? She sneered. Like you're protecting them from me? God, Kyle, you're pathetic. Her words stung, but I refused to let it show. Call me whatever you want, I replied, taking a step back toward the door. But until you start telling the truth, this is how it's going to be. Her glare burned into me as I turned away and closed the door behind me, locking it with a deliberate click. Through the window, I watched her stand there, her fists clenched at her sides. For a moment, it seemed like she might come back, but then she marched to her car, slammed the door, and sped off down the driveway. I leaned against the wall, my hands trembling as the adrenaline coursed through me. This fight was far from over. That much was certain. Madison wasn't going to back down, and neither was I. The next day, the air in the house felt heavy, like the stillness before a storm. I kept the kids occupied with games, movies, and anything else that might distract them from the brewing chaos. My phone remained eerily silent, which only made me more anxious. Madison wasn't one to stay quiet for long. By mid-afternoon, my suspicions were confirmed. A knock on the door broke through my thoughts. It wasn't Madison's style to knock, which meant she wasn't alone. My stomach dropped as I opened the door to find her standing there, flanked by a man in a crisp suit. I'm here for the kids, Madison announced, her voice sharp and businesslike. The man beside her cleared his throat, offering me a polite but tight smile. Mr. Kyle Reynolds? He asked. Martin Carter, Ms. Reynolds' legal counsel. She has the right to see her children, and we'd like to resolve this matter amicably. A lawyer. She brought a lawyer to my sister's house. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I forced myself to stay composed. Amicably? I repeated, disbelief dripping from my words. I shifted my gaze to Madison. You've been lying to me for months, and you think bringing a lawyer to my door is how we fix this? Madison crossed her arms, her expression hard and cold. This isn't about us, Kyle. It's about the kids. You can't just keep them from me like this. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me to keep Ethan and Lily from hearing. I'm not keeping them from you, I said, my voice steady despite the fire burning in my chest. I'm protecting them from the mess you're dragging into their lives. Her lawyer stepped forward, his professional demeanor unwavering. Mr. Reynolds, unless there is a court order to the contrary, Ms. Reynolds is entitled to equal custody. If this becomes a legal matter, it could get complicated. I let out a harsh laugh, glaring at Madison. Complicated? I snapped. Tell him about Jay, Madison. Tell him about the hotel receipts and the postcard. Her face flushed, but her expression remained defiant. Instead of answering, she crossed her arms and tilted her chin up. We're not doing this here, she said firmly. Let me see my kids, Kyle. Now. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to a dangerous calm. You don't get to barge in here with a lawyer and pretend you're the victim. You want to see the kids? Fine, but not until we've sorted this out in court. Her lawyer sighed audibly, clearly frustrated. Mr. Reynolds, he began, I strongly advise you to reconsider. This kind of behavior will not reflect well on you in a custody hearing. Good, I said, my voice like steel, because I've got plenty to say in that hearing, starting with the evidence I've gathered. For the first time, Madison's composure cracked. Her jaw tightened, and she stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. You're not taking my kids away from me, Kyle. I won't let you. I held my ground, my heart pounding in my chest. They deserve better than this, I said evenly. Better than you sneaking around and lying to their faces. For a moment, I thought she might lash out, but instead, she spun on her heel and stormed back to her car, her lawyer trailing behind. Before climbing in, she turned to glare at me over her shoulder. You think you've won, Kyle? This isn't over. I stood on the porch, watching as her car disappeared down the driveway. The silence that followed felt heavier than it had the day before. The battle was far from finished, but for now, I'd taken a stand. And I wasn't going to back down. My fists clenched at my sides. She was right. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Late in the evening, another knock came, breaking the uneasy quiet of the house. My heart was still pounding from Madison's earlier visit, and I hadn't expected her to come back so soon. Bracing myself for round two, I opened the door. But it wasn't Madison standing there. It was Jay. He was younger than I'd imagined, early 30s, clean-shaven, with slicked-back hair and an expression that wavered between confidence and unease. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace. Are you Kyle? He asked, his voice calm but steady. I didn't answer, my mind spinning. What was he doing here? What did he want? Look, I know you're angry, he said, stepping forward cautiously. But I thought it was time we talked. Man to man. The audacity of his words left me stunned, but only for a moment. You've got some nerve showing up here, I said, my voice sharp. He didn't flinch. I get it. I do. But this situation, it's gotten out of control. I laughed bitterly, leaning against the doorframe. Out of control? You're sleeping with my wife, and you think this is about control? He looked down, shuffling his feet awkwardly. I didn't come here to fight, okay? I needed to say my piece. Your piece? I repeated, venom dripping from every word. You've got 10 seconds before I slam this door in your face. Fine, he said quickly, raising his hands again. Madison didn't tell me she was married. Not at first. I didn't know about you, about the kids. My breath hitched, caught off guard by his confession. When I found out, I ended things. He continued, his voice earnest. But she didn't want to let go. The words hit like a punch to the gut. You're saying she pursued you? I asked, my tone disbelieving. He nodded, his expression genuine. I swear, I'm not proud of what happened. But once I knew the truth, I told her it was over. She wouldn't take no for an answer. Each word cut deeper, unraveling the last shreds of the life I thought I knew. Madison hadn't just cheated. She'd clung to the affair, refusing to let it end even when it started to crumble. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice low and tight. Because I've been where you are, he said, his tone softening. I know what it feels like to be lied to, manipulated. I couldn't just stand by while she drags this out. You deserve to know the truth. For a fleeting moment, I hated him less than I hated the situation, less than I hated her. What do you want from me? I asked, my eyes narrowing. Nothing, he said simply. I just wanted to come clean. You don't have to believe me, but I thought you'd rather hear it from me than keep wondering. I stared at him, the weight of his words pressing down like a tidal wave. Finally, I stepped back and gestured toward the street. "Go," I said hollowly, "before I change my mind about letting you walk away." He nodded and turned, retreating to his car without another word. As his taillights disappeared down the road, I closed the door and leaned against it, my mind racing. The truth wasn't a relief. It was a wrecking ball, obliterating what little foundation I had left. Madison had lied to me, to him, to everyone. She'd built this tangled mess of deceit, pulling us all into her chaos. For the first time, I wasn't just angry. I was disgusted. This wasn't just about me or the kids anymore. It was about exposing the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next day, I didn't wait for Madison to make her next move. I called her. "We need to meet," I said, my voice cold and deliberate. "Meet?" she repeated, her tone wary. "Yes," I replied. "Face to face. No lawyers. No distractions. Just you and me. I'm done playing games." There was a pause on the other end, long enough for me to hear the wheels turning in her mind. "Fine," she said finally. "Where?" "Here," I said firmly. "Tonight. 7 o'clock. She hesitated but eventually agreed. When she arrived, she looked polished, composed, dressed impeccably as if trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Her expression was a mix of defiance and unease, but I didn't give her a chance to settle. This time, I was the one in control, and she knew it. "Let's get straight to it," I said the moment she stepped inside, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I gestured toward the kitchen table, where everything was laid out. The receipts, the texts, the postcard, and the notebook that was the final nail in the coffin. Her face went pale as her eyes scanned the damning evidence. "Kyle, what is this?" she asked, her voice wavering. "It's the truth," I said sharply. "Laid out for you. No more excuses, no more lies. You're going to sit down and explain everything." She opened her mouth, ready to protest, but I cut her off before the words could escape. "Don't," I said, my tone like stone. "Don't insult me by pretending you don't know exactly what this is." I talked to him, Madison. Her jaw slackened, panic flashing across her face for the first time. "Jay came to my door," I continued, leaning forward, "and he told me everything. How you lied to him, how you hid the truth, how you refused to let him walk away, how you clung to this, whatever it was, like it was some lifeline out of your own life." Her shoulders sagged, the fight visibly draining out of her. She sank into the chair, her eyes fixed on the pile of evidence in front of her like it might swallow her whole. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she whispered, her voice so faint it was almost lost. "Then why did you let it?" I demanded, my anger bubbling to the surface. "Why lie to me? To the kids? What were you trying to prove?" She looked up at me, her eyes glassy with unshed tears, but I didn't feel a shred of sympathy. "Not anymore. I don't know," she said, shaking her head. I felt trapped, like everything was spiraling out of control. "And he made me feel seen." "Seen?" I repeated, my voice rising in disbelief. "Do you even hear yourself? You have 2 kids who adore you, a husband who bent over backwards to make you happy, and you threw it all away for what? A moment of attention?" She flinched at my words, the tears spilling over her cheeks. "I was lost, Kyle," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to stop." "That's your excuse?" I said, my tone razor sharp. "You didn't know how to stop? Did you ever think about Ethan or Lily? About what this would do to them?" Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stop. "This isn't just about you or me," I pressed, my voice breaking with emotion. "This is about them. They're going to grow up knowing their mother lied, cheated, and tore our family apart. Do you even understand what you've done?" She buried her face in her hands, her cries muffled against her palms. For a fleeting moment, I felt a flicker of pity, but it was snuffed out by the overwhelming weight of her betrayal. When she finally looked up, her face was streaked with tears. "What do you want from me, Kyle?" she asked, her voice raw and desperate. "I want the truth," I said, my voice steady but cold. "All of it. No more half-truths, no more deflection. Tell me everything, Madison." She drew in a shaky breath, then began to speak. She admitted to meeting Jay, through a mutual friend. How their conversations had started innocently, but quickly became something more. She confessed to lying about work trips, to using the hotels as meeting places. And then, after a long, agonizing pause, she admitted that their relationship had gone far beyond words. I stood there, listening as the foundation of our life together crumbled beneath the weight of her confession. By the time she finished, the silence in the house was deafening. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted to hurt you." I stared at her, my mind reeling, trying to process everything she'd just said. When I finally spoke, my words were calm, measured, and cold. "It's too late for that," I said. "The damage is done. The only thing left is to figure out where we go from here." Her tears came again, but I didn't stay to watch. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone to face the wreckage she created. The truth was out, but the battle was far from over. The silence in the house after our confrontation was oppressive. Madison stayed in the kitchen, her sobs fading to quiet sniffles while I paced upstairs, my thoughts racing like an endless loop of static. For so long, I'd been gripping at the seams of our life, trying to hold it all together, convinced that somewhere beneath the fractures was something worth salvaging. But now, standing in the wreckage of her confession, I realized this wasn't about saving anything. It was about surviving. Morning arrived with a weight I couldn't shake. I hadn't slept. Madison hadn't left. When I finally walked into the kitchen, she was still there, slumped over the table. Her face was pale, her eyes puffy and swollen from crying. She looked up as I entered, a flicker of something, hope maybe, in her gaze. But I didn't meet it. "We need to talk about next steps," I said, my tone flat, devoid of anything resembling warmth. She nodded slowly, her hands folding in front of her like a chastened child waiting for reprimand. "The kids come first," I continued, pulling out the chair opposite her. "Whatever happens between us, they're our priority. They don't deserve to be caught in the middle of this." "I agree," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I can't stay in this marriage," I said, the words cutting through the air like a blade. "Not after everything you've done." Her breath hitched, and tears welled in her eyes again, but she didn't argue. "I don't want to fight," she said after a long pause, her voice trembling. "If this is what you need, I'll cooperate. Her voice cracked. "I just want to be part of their lives." "You will be," I said firmly. "But not like this. Not under the same roof. We'll figure out custody, visitation, everything. But the kids need stability, and that starts with boundaries." Her shoulders sagged, and the tears spilled over again. "I'm sorry," she choked out for what felt like the 100th time. I didn't respond. Apologies didn't rebuild trust. They didn't undo the damage. By the time Ethan and Lily returned from my sister's house later that day, Madison had packed a bag. She hugged them tightly, tears streaming down her face as they peppered her with questions. "Why are you leaving, Mommy?" Ethan asked, his small voice heavy with confusion. I knelt to their level, my heart breaking at the sight of their worried faces. "Mommy needs some time to herself," I said gently. "But we're still a family. That's not going to change." The words felt hollow, even to me, but they seemed to satisfy the kids, at least for now. At the door, Madison paused, turning back to me. "Kyle," she began, her voice trembling, "I know you'll never forgive me, but I hope someday you'll understand." I couldn't answer her. I couldn't find the words. The door clicked shut behind her, and the weight of everything she'd done settled over me like a storm cloud. The weeks that followed were a blur. Paperwork, endless conversations, and the exhausting task of creating a new normal for Ethan and Lily consumed my days. Madison and I established a co-parenting arrangement that was cordial but clinical, strictly business. She moved into a modest apartment across town, and the kids began splitting their time between us. Some days, the anger felt suffocating, the urge to confront her all over again almost unbearable. Other days, there was a strange clarity, a lightness. Without her lies hanging over me, I felt like I could finally breathe. One night, after tucking the kids into bed, I sat on the couch with a beer in hand, the quiet of the house wrapping around me like a blanket. For the first time in weeks, I let myself reflect, I'd lost my marriage, but not myself. I'd faced betrayal, heartbreak, and anger, but I hadn't let it consume me. And most importantly, I protected what mattered most: Ethan and Lily. If there's one lesson I'd offer to anyone going through something like this, it's this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. Face it head on, no matter how painful. The truth, no matter how devastating, is better than living in the shadow of lies. There's always a way forward. For me, that way forward wasn't with Madison. It was with the life I was building for myself and my kids. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving towards something real. In the aftermath of everything, I came to understand that life doesn't end with betrayal. It changes. It reshapes itself around the cracks and the losses. And in that reshaping, there's an opportunity to grow. Madison's choices left scars on our family, but they also illuminated what truly matters: honesty, love, and resilience. For Ethan and Lily, I'll continue to be a source of stability, a constant in a world that might feel unpredictable. For myself, I've learned that moving forward isn't about erasing the past. It's about building something stronger in its place. As I look toward the future, I hold on to the clarity that came from facing the truth, no matter how painful. I've found my footing again, and I'm determined to create a life filled with the kind of love and trust that my kids and I deserve. The storm may not be over, but I'm standing tall, ready for whatever comes next.